All right, let's jump right into this explainer and unpack the cultural explosion that literally dragged Europe out of the Middle Ages, the Italian Renaissance. We're going to take a close look at a period that completely reshaped the way humanity views art, literature, and honestly, our own potential. This was the era that bridged the gap between the medieval world and the modern one, and the ideas generated during this time, they are still deeply embedded in our society today. But hey, before we get to the famous names and the iconic art, we gotta lay down some ground rules for what actually defined this 300-year period from 1300 to 1600. So what does the word Renaissance actually mean in this context? Well, it wasn't just some passing trend, it was a profound rebirth, which is the literal French translation of the word. We're talking about an intense, deliberate revival of classical learning that totally shattered the medieval status quo, and it sparked these revolutionary leaps in science, politics, and art. So here's our roadmap for today's explainer. 1. The meaning of rebirth. 2. Why start in Italy. 3. New worldly and classical values. 4. A revolution in art. And 5. Writing in the vernacular.
Starting off with Section 1, the meaning of rebirth, and how Europe finally stepped out of the Middle Ages. Moving right along to Section 2, why start in Italy? Let's look at the geographic origins.
Now, you might be wondering, why Italy? Why not France or England? Well, this cultural movement didn't just happen everywhere all at once. It actually radiated outward, specifically from these incredibly powerful, independent Italian city-states you see here around 1500 CE, places like the Republic of Florence and the Duchy of Milan. Italy was essentially the perfect incubator for this rebirth, for 3 very specific reasons. First, you had these bustling trade cities that were just a hotbed for the rapid exchange of ideas. Second, within these cities, a brand new class of super wealthy merchants and bankers emerged. And third, these scholars were literally walking past the ruins of classical Rome every single day, which provided constant visual inspiration for their work. And this new merchant class, they craved a legacy. So they became what we call patrons, meaning they used their massive fortunes to commission writers, architects, and artists. Think of fiercely competitive, mega-rich families like the Medici in Florence. Honestly, without their massive financial engines, the artistic explosion of the Renaissance would have probably remained just a cool idea. Which brings us to Section 3, New Worldly and Classical Values. Let's dive into this new philosophical mindset. Now, all this influx of wealth created a massive philosophical shift. During the Middle Ages, scholars were almost entirely focused on spiritual values, basically forcing classical texts to fit into Christian dogma. But Renaissance thinkers completely flipped the script. They wanted to understand antiquity on its own terms, free from that strictly spiritual lens. Because of this, the era became fundamentally secular. Now, religion was definitely still important, for sure, but the intellectual focus shifted to the here and now, the tangible mechanics of politics, the physical beauty of nature, and the everyday worldly experiences of human life, rather than solely fixating on the afterlife. And this intense secular curiosity birthed humanism. This was a philosophy that championed human potential and earthly achievements. It was this amazing blend of a deep respect for what humanity had accomplished in antiquity, mixed with a radical optimism about what we were capable of achieving in the future. All right, Section 4, a revolution in art. Let's see how the art mirrored the times. You know, art acts as a mirror to society, and the Renaissance reflection was completely different from what came before. Moving away from the flat, highly stylized spiritual messaging of medieval art, sculptors started obsessively studying anatomy. As you can see, they created these highly realistic figures that truly celebrated the physical, worldly reality of the human body. Painters also completely revolutionized their craft by mastering perspective. By applying actual mathematical calculations to create vanishing points, they shattered the flat canvas. They created these stunning illusions of three-dimensional depth that draw you directly into a realistic, tangible space. It was a total game changer. This whole era was obsessed with maximizing human potential, and nobody embodied that better than Michelangelo. He exhibited world-class skill as an architect, a sculptor, and a painter, even though he famously complained that painting the Sistine Chapel was absolute torture. This whole concept of the multi-talented Renaissance man is the direct result of those humanist ideals we just talked about. Down to our final section, number 5, writing in the vernacular. Let's look at how literature was transformed. So, just like art became more accessible, the written word did too, thanks to a shift toward the vernacular. Basically, writers moved away from classical Latin, which pretty much gatekept knowledge for just the highly educated elite, and they started publishing works in their everyday, native spoken languages. This democratization of language allowed writers like Dante to completely change their subject matter. Instead of these distant, formal treatises, literature became fiercely personal. They started writing realistic poetry and letters, detailing their own flawed human thoughts and feelings, putting the individual front and center. As we wrap up this explainer, I really want you to think about this massive shift we've just traced, from the strict spiritual focus of the Middle Ages to this absolute explosion of individual achievement, worldly curiosity, and artistic revolution. We literally still feel the echoes of this humanism today. So I leave you with this final thought to consider. If the Renaissance was a rebirth of human potential sparked by new ideas and wealthy patrons, what fields, what art, and what amazing achievements might a modern rebirth inspire in our world today? Thanks for exploring this with me. Keep questioning and keep learning.